The problem I think we find out there in culture is the comparison factor is so profound. Now, I know a lot of people who say, I don't wrestle with comparison. But what you don't realize is that the social media images are constantly subliminally programming you around what does success look like? What does sexiness look like? What does strength look like? What does, and you fill in the blank, whatever happens to be important to you. And the image is always of somebody who's better than you, who's got better makeup than you, or maybe a tighter body than you, or has a nicer car than you. Why do people feel like nobody cares about them? Why do people have such low self-worth? And it's not because they're directly hearing you have no self-worth, but it's the message of culture is constantly saying this is sexy and this is success, and this is awesome, and this is, and you fill in the blank. And so the message back to me then is, I'm not there.
Welcome back to the Flourish podcast. Today we are going to be talking about mental health.
Hey, that's awesome. So my name's Abe Brown, and this is my partner.
My name is Shae.
Shae, and we're really excited today to spend some time talking about mental health. And so Shae, I think it would be really cool to start by talking at it from a broad perspective. What do you feel or what do you see happening right now when it comes to mental health out there?
So I would say it's definitely declining if you just look at the stats. I think that with mental health, it's kind of up there with physical health in terms of how important it is. I think there's a lot of people, if you're sick, you go to the doctor and they evaluate you and help you out. But when it comes to suffering in our mental health, it kind of gets swept under the rug, more so for men than women, because it is a stigma. But, and then if we do go to the doctor, a lot of the time we're just prescribed a Band-Aid fix. And so what if we also looked at how to develop our brains and habits as well? I mean, I think that it's just not this one Band-Aid fix. I think there's layering reasons as to why we have issues in our mental health, and to kind of dig through the layers to get to the bottom of it. So yeah, I would agree. And I mean, you used a really important word, I think, and that word is stigma. It's funny how, for whatever reason, if somebody has an injury on the job, or if they end up with a horrible physical condition, we don't blame them, right? It's like, okay, you got injured, you need to get better. Or let's say you discover one day that you have diabetes, or maybe, God forbid, cancer. It's not like we sit there and blame that person. But for some reason, when it comes to mental health, if I'm wrestling with depression, or I'm feeling anxiety, or maybe I'm a little mixed up in terms of my identity, or not really sure about my purpose, and maybe sometimes even feeling like I'm losing my mind, which is like every day for me, by the way, it's like, okay, well then what's wrong with you, Abe? And what did you do to cause that? As if somehow people wake up and make choices to have bad mental health. And so, why, or maybe, I guess, why don't we start maybe looking at it as a woman? Like, have you experienced stigma around mental health, or do you feel that is something that women experience in general? I think so. I think there's a bit of shame wrapped around it for sure. And I think, I know for myself, I had mental health issues as, young as high school. I was diagnosed with depression. And so from, 15 years old, telling me to go on antidepressants, I didn't know there was an option to either like go to therapy or learn about how my brain operates and different methods. The only thing I was given at that time, which was a while ago, was just, here's these antidepressants. And so back then, I know we've evolved in the last 15, 20 years. But to just know that maybe it has something more to do with my daily habits. How I didn't understand that you could renew your mind. That was like not even a concept in my brain back then. And just all of these things that we can do to better ourselves versus just a Band-Aid. So.
Yeah, right on. Band-Aids don't really work when it comes to mental health. I mean, they barely work when it comes to, physical lesions, unless, of course, you're operating under care and treatment and make sure you keep it clean and all of that in terms of infection. But, I'm also really interested in mental health when it comes to stigma for men. As a man, I think I grew up often hearing the messaging of what a real man was, as if somehow there was a fake man out there. Who's the fake man? Yeah. Because if this is a real man, then that must mean there's a fake man. And I guess a real man was, back, like, not to show you how old I am, but like the Marlboro Man, some dude with a cowboy hat on and a cigarette sticking out of his face, or some kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger type dude, or Sylvester Stallone, or like you pick the sort of almost meme that was somehow a real man. But none of these real men ever showed weakness. None of these real men ever said, man, I'm struggling, I'm confused. As a matter of fact, oftentimes the things that were harming the men the most were the things that they were celebrating. Like, oh, okay, let's go drinking with the boys, as if somehow that makes you a real man, like how many shots you can take. Or, let's go smoke a couple of joints, as if like now I'm a real man because I happen to be doing substance abuse, right? And, I think that one thing I've discovered as a man is that when you start to have the conversation around mental health, you feel almost this hesitation because you're afraid, is somebody going to think I'm weak? Is somebody going to question my manhood, right? Is somebody going to make me almost feel like I'm unfit to be a man? And I'm just going to say straight up, I think that's horrible. I think that's horrible messaging. I think it's actually causing more harm than we know. Do you know that men have substance abuse issues in Canada at the rate of about 3 times that of women? And they also are committing suicide at about the rate of 3 to 4 times that of women across the entire developed world. And that is a crisis, no matter how you define it. And it's not because men are inherently more broken or more bad or more messed up than women, but I do think it's often because they feel like I can't really talk about it. And so you'll see a guy who holds on and holds on and holds on until they can't take it anymore, and then they just go out back and they end their lives with a shotgun behind the shed, or they leave a note and you find them hung themselves. I mean, and I say this with a brokenness because I've been a part of working with those grieving families time after time after time. And you think to yourself, this did not have to happen, right?
Absolutely. And I think, I know you're doing some great things in the community in Calgary. Abe's hosting, it's called Real Men's Breakfast. And it's really just helping break the stigma of, having a safe place for men to get together and share and understand that we are, at the end of the day, all humans that have struggles, and to be able to open up. And I know, Abe, for yourself, you have a lot of experience in the business world, in ministry over the years, in homelessness, working with even Indigenous communities. So what have you noticed in mental health in those areas?
Well, I think the most important thing when it comes to mental health, and this is the problem with stigma, most of the research shows, if not all of it, that, the most important thing when it comes to your mental health is your relationships with other people. And that was actually the statement from Dr. George Vallant, who was a Harvard professor of psychiatry. He conducted the world's longest study of mental health, literally in history, over 40 years. And that study is still going on. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And after his 40 years of involvement with that study, he said the only thing that really matters in life are your relationships with other people. So from Indigenous communities to people who are experiencing homelessness, to people who are trying to recover from the impacts of trauma and abuse, to just people who have more bad days than good days. What do we all need? We need community. So you talked for a moment about the Real Men's Breakfast. And for me, that's almost a play on words. Like when we called it that, it was almost like, we're going to call it Real Men. Yeah. And so I kind of joke about that, like as if there's fake men. And how we kind of define it is that a real man is not like how big are your biceps, or, do you have a beard or not, or do you smoke or not, all of this silly stuff. But it's a man who's real are respectful. And so they respect themselves. And if you truly respect yourself, well, dude, you're going to respect other people. The E is empathetic, right? In other words, if you respect yourself and others, then you're going to try to be empathetic. It doesn't mean you're a bleeding heart, but it means that you listen before you speak. It means that you don't get triggered and rush to judgment and let your anger take over, but you know what it is to think, okay, how is my partner feeling? How's my wife feeling? How's my kids feeling? Let's empathize. And then the A is authenticity. it doesn't matter. It is what it is. And so just be authentic about it. Stop putting on a mask and stop trying to act like you're all that. It's okay to just say, hey, this is where I'm at today. And then the L, and I think when you do the first three, respect, empathy, authenticity, I think if you do those well, then leadership is just a natural byproduct. People want to be around someone who's respectful, who's empathetic, who's authentic. And now we're not talking about leadership as in dominating or bossing people around, but it's actually a servant leadership model, which the research shows is the most effective sort of leadership that's out there, especially if you're a family kind of man. Like you got a family and you just show up and you're barking out things at your wife and your kids, they're going to grow up to hate you, right? Like they're not going to respect you. They're going to fear you. That's not what you want. But if they see you as a servant leader, you're going to have good days and bad days because, hey, welcome to parenting. But it's going to actually earn their respect over the years. And that's going to give you that place of leadership, right? And so men have, in these breakfasts, it's been unbelievable to me. I've been doing this kind of work for years, and I can't even begin to describe the safety that has been created. And men in these events, they're really simple. We have a couple of speakers, and then we open it up, and there'll be 40 people in the room, and guy after guy after guy will stand up and talk about what is speaking to them. There's so much transparency and vulnerability. And is it solving the problem? No. But it's starting a conversation in a way that is really important today. And yeah, we deal with the real issues. We deal with depression. We deal with substance abuse. We deal with guys who are thinking about suicide. We deal with, people who are struggling to raise their families. But I'd rather play in that space than, hey, I'm looking for all the perfect men, come to my meeting, right? Let's actually deal with real men, real struggles, real people. And as we do that, I tell you what, I think we can change the world.
Yeah, I think it's really great. And then just feedback from people who I know who have attended that. You said, you do it every few months. So it's really just opening up a conversation for men. But even like my own dad who started going there, it opened up his mindset to think about putting himself around a group of men. So he found a men's group that he attends every week, and just how much that's helped him and how much value he gets out of that. And that all kind of stemmed from just going into that Real Men's Breakfast and the idea that men can be vulnerable. And when you come together, it does wonders. So
yeah, thank you for that. And, honestly, when you actually look at it, and let's now kind of move from men to just people in general, because I think that's important. And you referenced, I've been blessed to go to 25, 30 different Indigenous communities, like on the reserve at the invitation of their leaders, and spend time with them, often in their homes, often in community centers, and training and coaching and working. And I've worked in homelessness for many years, and I did a lot of things. And the thing that I've discovered is not only do we need that safety that comes from relationships, but mental health is completely devastated when we don't feel like we're significant. Mm-hmm. So we have to matter. And, the problem I think we find out there in culture is we have this relentless thing going on. I don't even think you're aware of it. I know I have only really just become aware of it as I think about it. The comparison factor is so profound. Now, I know a lot of people who say, I don't wrestle with comparison. But what you don't realize is that the social media images are constantly subliminally programming you around what does success look like? What does sexiness look like? What does strength look like? What does, and you fill in the blank, whatever happens to be important to you. And the image is always of somebody who's better than you, who's got better makeup than you, or maybe a tighter body than you, or has a nicer car than you, or is dressed nicer than you. And that messaging is, because I'm always thinking, why do people feel so worthless? Like why do people feel like nobody cares about them? Why do people have such low self-worth? And it's not because they're directly hearing, you have no self-worth, but it's the message of culture is constantly saying, this is sexy, and this is success, and this is awesome, and this is, and you fill in the blank. And so the message back to me then is, I'm not there. So now I feel insignificant. I feel worthless. And I think that's one of the reasons young ladies actually struggle with mental health a lot.
I think so too. And I think, I think we all know that social media is not real. It is the highlights of your year. But at the same time, even though we know that, we still compare ourselves. And so I think it's very toxic for the wrong people. Like if you're in a bad frame of mind, if you're really struggling mentally, if you know you're in the thick of comparison, it's like, social media, again, is also an addiction. So it's like, it's bad for you, but you keep picking up your phone. It's almost like I think that if it's that bad, we need to like remove the apps, at least for a time. I know back in like 2015, I deleted my Instagram for an entire year. And then I got it back. But I was like, wow, I actually don't need this. And I knew I didn't, like at that time, I was like, I can't be on here and I'm in a much healthier place. But I think, it's just knowing yourself and setting up boundaries for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon because you started by saying we all know social media is not true. And yet, it's like sometimes I wonder, do we know that? And not like to challenge you, but I think, like I have the benefit of almost half of my life, I grew up without these devices. Social media wasn't a thing. Like, I literally, my identity and personality was being formed, let's say the first 20 years of my life. I had the opportunity to have to figure it out. Now we did have media, of course, like I wasn't raised in a cave somewhere, and we had advertisements and we had all of those things. Yes, but it wasn't as relentless as it is now. Like the thing that I think about is, and I think about it a lot because I have a 9-year-old daughter and, she's on her device. Now we limit it. Of course we do. And, believe me, my wife who does cybersecurity, she does not let her on social media because she's very aware of the dangers. But there's going to come a time when we can't hold her back, and nor should we, because you can't just live in this protective bubble. But then I think at that point, like, what will the impact be of that? And what am I doing as her dad to help her form her sense of identity and worth and value so that before she gets to that place where this barrage is hitting her, she's actually ready? Like she has friends in her school who have 2,000 TikTok followers. I mean in her grade 4 class. And to me, that's like, I can't even imagine that. Do you know what I mean? I think I have way less than that, and not that I'm competing with a 9-year-old, but I just think to myself, imagine what's going into that 9-year-old's brain, not to judge, but the whole metric for that 9-year-old is, how do I do this thing? I want to get followers. I want to get this and that. And I think that's okay. Not judging the parenting, but I had that benefit of like, who am I? And then social media came along. And I think for people who may not have had that, I wonder, like, is that one of the factors that's impacting people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you think some other factors are?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, like mental health is one way to really think about mental health. And if this is something that I can share that might be helpful to people, it's really, really, really good. Imagine you have a perfect tree. And I know, like, none of us is a perfect tree. So, but just for a moment, let's do a thought experiment. And you take a perfect tree and you plant that perfect tree in a relatively perfect environment. So it has great soil, it has adequate levels of moisture, the sun is there, the bright air is there, it's all good. Well, of course, then we have a reasonable expectation that tree is going to grow and it's going to be healthy and it's going to flourish. But imagine if any one of those factors are changed. It doesn't get enough sunlight. Imagine if the air becomes toxic. Imagine if the water becomes polluted. Imagine if something leaches into the soil. Any one of those factors can kill the tree or at least seriously damage. And so I think our mental health, it's both like, what am I doing for me? That's the tree. And I have to work at that every day. And I think the second factor is, what environment am I placing myself in? Am I putting myself at the most opportunity to thrive? So maybe we could break those two things down. I think the first one that is really important is what makes a healthy tree. And in Flourishing, we have the benefit of working with Dr. Wayne Hammond. And he has done such a great job of helping us to understand, after his 40 years of research and clinical practice, that there's actually a set of factors that allows a person to thrive, to flourish. It's, things like emotional intelligence. It's things like having a growth mindset. It's being able to collaborate and play nice in the sandbox. It's being able to solve problems, right? It's also having a decent self-esteem, not some kind of ego maniac at all. So you also have enough humility where you recognize where you have gaps, but you're not looking at yourself in the mirror, despising what you see. You're able to have self-confidence. And, listen, those things, everything I just listed, emotional intelligence, growth mindset, collaboration, self-esteem, these are skills. None of these are genetic traits. Not a single one is DNA that like this dude got and the other one didn't. It's like, no, I have to work at those every day. So what drives self-esteem? What drives emotional intelligence? What drives or helps me to develop collaboration? And so in Flourishing, we spend a lot of time helping people to do that. And then I think the second element is the idea of the soil and the environment that you're in. Because no matter how much work you do on you, if you are constantly in an unhealthy environment, the environment wins every time, right?
Yes.
So, for you, like what sort of environments have helped you with your mental health?
Yeah, I think association is everything. So as I started realizing, I know it's not a black and white topic, so maybe I'll start with that. It's definitely not black and white. However, I can just speak from my own experience, how I went from depression for many years off and on into my later 20s where I really came out of that. And I would say I really worked on my my input. And so I was very cautious of what I was putting in my mind. I did realize there was times where I would purposely listen to sad songs and then I would wonder why I was sad. Like, it's so silly, right? And it's kind of funny. But I realized, obviously, if you're watching a sad movie, if you're listening to a sad song, you're purposely putting yourself in a sad mood.
I love me some sad Korean love stories. I'll tell you what, man, that's like, it feels good to have a good cry though every so often, doesn't it?
Yeah, once in a while. But I also learned this thing about how there is a difference between feeling and fueling emotions. So I realized that I would just hang on to these emotions and depression was actually my identity. Like, this is who I am. And I had to separate myself from learning that, sure, that may be a situation that I'm dealing with, but at the core, if I pull back the layers, that's not who I am. And so I'm still for 10 years now, I listen to podcasts and positive input literally every day. And if I go a day or two without it, I'm a different person, because I know, when you renew your mind, it's like, I thought it was this one and done process. And unfortunately, I realized that's not the case. It's every day. And so it takes effort on our end. But and then getting around association as you do change your mindset and your beliefs and what you're speaking, you want to be around more happier people, people that are living in expectation. They're living in a positive way. They're looking for the positive things in life and not dragging you down with the negative things. You'll naturally attract yourself to people like that, I've found. So yeah. Keep those people close. So
yeah, and I mean, honestly, like you shared a lot of great wisdom, and the environment matters in your life, right? I think that it's only smart, especially as we're right at the end of 2023, we're heading into 2024. You can't cry over spilt milk of the past and all the things that have happened. But one of the greatest realizations is, hey, if you don't like where you are, move. You can change it. You're not a tree. And so, using our tree metaphor is kind of breaks down when you actually recognize that poor little tree can't actually move. Whereas I can move, I can change, I can evolve, and I can put myself into healthy environments. Now, of course, who can't do this? Well, of course, children can't, and so we're not blaming anybody. But if you're an adult, then ultimately the environment that you put yourself in is the environment that you're choosing to put yourself in. And I'm not suggesting that you look for a perfect environment, because you'll never find it. But you want to just be thinking, like, on balance, are the people that are around me cheering me on more than they're tearing me down? Are they seeking to give to me as much as I'm looking to receive and as much as I'm giving to them? And this one is really, really important. When I leave their presence, do I feel less? Do I feel less self-worth, less adequacy, less strong? Or when I leave their presence, do I feel built up? Do I feel empowered? There's some people, they just have an energy where it's like, man, I just don't feel that good about myself anymore. I don't feel that empowered. And that doesn't mean we don't have tough conversations, but those tough conversations should not leave us feeling crippled mentally and emotionally. So we want to thank you all for tuning into this episode of the Flourish podcast. We hope this conversation around mental health helps you. Listen, if you are struggling with your mental health, get help. Please do not self-isolate. That is one of the worst things, if not the worst thing that you can do, because people can't help you if they don't know what you're faced with. And definitely if it's severe, then see a mental health professional, reach out, check yourself into a hospital, get some help. But if it's not quite that severe, then reach out to a coach or a friend or a family member or somebody that can help you pull out of that darkness. And as always, please go to failuretoflourishing.com and you can download a free online course there where we're actually sharing about the specifics of our mental health journey and how we went from that place where we felt like we were failing to a place where now truly we're flourishing and thriving. And thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in our next episode.